Each and every Wednesday, we will be here to discuss, yes, our rest of season top 150 rankings, how that plays into the season-long trade market, our redraft trade calculator, buy lows, sell highs, moves to make. Underdog just launched a best ball tournament for rest of season as well, which will play into this. I want to start, Mark, with some schedule stuff because I think this is important to start thinking about. Yes, we have buys coming up. That'll start getting factored into the rest of season top 150 when teams have had their buys and others haven't. But we get these stretches, these pockets where if you're in the trade market, you can get in front of this stuff. The first one I wanted to talk about is the New York Jets. Talked to Silva a little bit yesterday and about the Garrett Wilson situation. I just don't see how this team gets into shootouts. Their defense is too good. They play too slow. They play too methodical. I don't know that Garrett Wilson is like the explosive turn a game into a shootout type of receiver anyways. And on top of all that, they have a really brutal schedule coming up for wide receivers. So I don't want to bail on Garrett Wilson, but at the same time, I have relatively tame expectations for him for the next month. And maybe that means I should consider selling Garrett Wilson. I don't know. Mark, what do you think about Jets stuff right now?
It's a tricky spot for sure because I think at this point, Garrett Wilson isn't necessarily viewed as a sell high, just given his box score production in the first 3 weeks. But I do think, especially after Aaron Rodgers looking really good last Thursday night in primetime, that people are still optimistic on Garrett Wilson's outlook. And you mentioned the really rough schedule upcoming. They play the Broncos, Vikings, Bills, Steelers, Patriots, and Texans in the next 6 weeks. There's not any matchup I get excited about in those. So if people are still viewing Garrett Wilson as a locked in wide receiver one, I think now is a decent time to sell if you can. Again, he's not necessarily the best sell high we've ever seen given his early production, but I do think the schedule lends itself to, potentially selling at a high value if he continues to struggle. You could maybe make the same case for Breece Hall. It's really tough to sell Breece Hall, but you could get an absolutely massive haul for him at this point if you wanted to. So it's not great looking at their schedule. And man, I don't know. It's tough because these are, locked in first round players for us coming into the year. I don't think that there's, with Aaron Rodgers looking healthy and the offensive line looking solid, it's hard to paint too much of a bare picture. But yeah, the schedule leaves a lot to be desired. And if your league mates are valuing them as, elite first round picks, I think now could be a decent time to sell high.
Yeah. So I brought up the trade calculator here for anyone watching on YouTube, which I highly recommend that you do. And the trade that I would at least consider Breece Hall for Chris Godwin and James Cook. Now, I don't know if I could actually pull the trigger on trading away Breece Hall, but you could get a ton for him. James Cook and Chris Godwin, you might be able to get something more than that in the actual market for it. Yeah. And just going back to the Garrett Wilson stuff, we have him ranked pretty high. Our rankings are for full season. There's some chance, right, that hey, he doesn't perform well the next 1, 2, 3 weeks. You could get him back for cheaper than you just sold him for. And I think that would be, depending on how active your league is, I think that's at least an interesting idea.
For sure. And at this point too, I think that it's really hard to identify clear sells in the fantasy football market, just with how fantasy production's been down the first 2 weeks. It's so much easier to pinpoint potential buy lows than sell highs. So with the Jets, upcoming schedule, they are at least up there in the conversation as guys you can get good value for at this point.
Yes. What Mark is saying is there's no one to sell high on because everyone sucks. That's what Mark is trying to say there. I'll simplify it. Okay, Daigle. On the other side of the coin, with an easy schedule coming up, is certainly the Chicago Bears. My God, man. Home versus Rams, home versus Panthers, home versus Jaguars, at Commanders, at Cardinals, their next 5 games. I could not come down from the heavens and set up a better schedule than an NFL team could see than that one. What do you think about Bears stuff right now? And by the way, breaking news into the show, Keenan Allen is at practice today for the Chicago Bears.
And there is some ambiguity in the Bears passing offense because of Keenan Allen's absence the last 2 games. I'll go in depth on Roman Dunze later, but right now, because of that soft schedule, you can just imagine everyone getting there. We also have major question marks about their running offense, no matter who they play, a lot like the Raiders. We thought at least there was a 1-game sample against the Panthers headed into week 3 where the Raiders, for instance, could run the ball and get Zamir White going. It turns out they probably just can't run the ball at all. I still have those question marks about the Bears. Maybe the Bears, quite literally, no matter who they put under center, can't run the ball anyhow. So they have to be a pass-first offense. And maybe that's why they've had the 4th highest pass play rate from neutral game script. So although Allen is expected to return now, I still want to get all the pieces. Odunze, Allen, and DJ Moore, who 30% of his targets have come from screens, but he's still a guy who beats man coverage regularly going back to last year. Because of the schedule, I want them all. I think it's that simple.
Yeah, okay. I think what people are going to say, Daigle, is why would we have Keenan Allen ahead of Rome? And we have this very close. And like in the trade calculator, they'll come out almost identical. People are going to say Keenan's hurt, he's old, he's fat. Meanwhile, we had these guys pretty close preseason, and now Rome is healthy and looks like, at least based on last game, they had an insane amount of volume last game. It looks like dude can really ball. Why Keenan over Rome would be a question. I get that it's basically even underlying in our trade calculator stuff.
We only have one sample, and the 1-game sample, Keenan Allen dominated everyone. A 44% target share before he left the field. He had 49% of the team's air yards as well. It wasn't just underneath and from the slot shallow. So right now, again, just on a 1-game sample, Keenan Allen is their number 1 wide receiver.
Yeah, and I think to Daigle's point, I would just reiterate, run game looks broken. There's already rumors that they're going to give up on DeAndre Swift somewhat and go to Roschon Johnson. No matter who's back there, I feel like run game is just broken. Might as well try to throw it 50 times in the game. All right, Jack, let's go to the top. People are obsessed with the top. Anytime we put out any kind of rankings, it's always, oh, how could you guys have this in the number 1, number 8, number 10, which I don't think is the most important. I think it's really close up here, but I get that it generates the most discussion. I think you can make a case for having Saquon Barkley just straight up number 1 overall player. We have J. Jeff and CeeDee Lamb ahead of them, but we have moved Saquon Barkley to the number 1 running back overall this week in front of Bijan Robinson, in front of Breece Hall. I'm not sure there's moves to make on Saquon Barkley, Jack. I mean, I could not fathom trading him. I mean, just absolutely could not. There's so few running backs who get the kind of workload that he gets with his talent in this offense. But if you're drafting right now, you will have decisions to make at the top in some of this best ball stuff. Jack, what do you think about Barkley and the rest of the top here?
Yeah, I think if you have him in a season-long league, you're just holding on to him. I mean, he's the most valuable running back in fantasy football. That's not really an asset you ever trade. The big thing for Barkley, he has 4 rush touchdowns in 3 games. A lot of the worry preseason was, is Jalen Hurts going to steal all the rushing touchdowns? So far, that has not been the case. I mean, especially in the short term with both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith potentially out, Barkley's also going to get peppered with targets. I mean, it's really hard to differentiate up here. Like you said, we have Barkley as the number 1 running back. I would still take Justin Jefferson over him, given that Darnold looks very competent. The Vikings offense as a whole looks very competent, and Jefferson is clearly the best receiver in the NFL. I think if you're talking CeeDee Lamb versus Saquon Barkley, it's kind of a coin flip there. Lamb's target shares have not been what we're used to through 3 games, but it's also only a 3-game sample size on a guy who we have an extended sample size of him being one of the best assets in fantasy football. So I would have Jefferson number 1. After that, I think it's kind of pick your poison between CD and Saquon, depending on if you prefer the running back or the receiver.
Yeah, and I know, and I'll have to think about this more. I haven't done any of the resurrection or, mid-season DK best ball drafts yet, but my gut is that I still want to have that kind of barbell-ish at the running back position. And so that would maybe make me lean Saquon over CD if I was doing a draft, just because in the mid-range there, I still want to be hitting wide receiver over running back, especially given that guys like, James Cook and a ton of these guys, Kyron, Kamara, Jacobs, they're all going way higher. Mixon, they're all going higher than they would have been, than they were before the season. All right. Keep it moving, Mark, to this Bucs situation now. Mike Evans has really struggled the last 2 weeks. Last week, he was up against Patrick Surtain. The week before that, he saw plenty of volume, I think, did not convert on it. We haven't seen, to me, the bear case on Mike Evans was like, oh, Jalen McMillan's going to come in here and start earning a ton of targets. That's not what we've seen. We've just seen Chris Godwin just being the absolute alpha here. We still have Mike Evans ranked 1 spot ahead of Chris Godwin in the rest of season top 150. Basically, identical. I feel like the trade market, though, if your league is game log bros, they'll be like, oh my God, I'd much rather have Chris Godwin than Mike Evans right now. So what do you think about this Bucs wide receiver spot?
If these were full PPR rankings, I definitely think Chris Godwin would be well ahead of Mike Evans. At this point, with half PPR and still leaning towards, touchdown production, carrying a massive weight, I do think Mike Evans and Chris Godwin is more of a coin flip at this point. You mentioned that Evans was matched up with Patrick Surtain in week 3. That's a tough matchup. They also played Detroit in week 2, which favors, slot wide receivers compared to outside wide receivers. And in week 1, when they played Washington, who's a sieve to all wide receivers, we saw Mike Evans catch 2 touchdowns and kind of return that wide receiver 2 value that we're expecting moving forward. So I don't think it's necessarily cut and dry who should be ahead of one another. If you feel like Godwin should be ahead, that's fine with me. He certainly earned more targets at this point, has 25 to Mike Evans 15. And when you do look at the next few weeks, it does kind of favor slot matchups as well, going against Philly, Atlanta, and New Orleans the next 3 weeks. So, but I do think it's funny just in fantasy football that when guys score touchdowns, we always get comments that they're too low in the ranks. If Chris Godwin didn't score a touchdown this past week, he would have the exact same line as Tank Dell did, which is 5 catches for 62 yards. So, touchdowns carry so much weight, especially in half PPR. If Chris Godwin scores a touchdown every game, he's obviously deserves to be ahead of Mike Evans in the rest of season rankings, but I'm not sure it's that cut and dry, and think Evans is definitely going to have some blow up games where the touchdowns go to him, and Godwin, still has 5 or 6 catches, but for, 63, 70 yards, something like that. And we would much prefer Mike Evans in that case.
Yeah, I think Mike Evans is a clear buy. I do want to put it out there that he's 31. It's not like I don't want to sit here and say, oh, it's definitely Mike Evans matchup, inefficiency, he'll be fine, whatever. I mean, he is 31. Just want to put that out there, but I do think that he is a buy still, especially if you can get him relatively cheaply. Let's go to the Packers situation here, Daigle. This is a interesting one, of course, because everyone expects Jordan Love back this week. And when you get Jordan Love back, you get an entirely different offense. Obviously, in the rankings, we are trying to adjust for what's going to happen going forward, which will be maybe one of the few teams, the Packers, who will be positive pass rate over expectation the rest of the way. I mean, if there's only 8 or 9 teams this year who are going to be positive pass rate over expectation, I could see the Packers being one of them as long as Jordan Love stays healthy. Now, I don't think people in leagues are dumb enough to be like, I didn't know Malik Willis was starting. No wonder Jaden Reed was so bad. No wonder Romeo Doubs was so bad, right? I think everybody knows that, right? So what do you think about Packers stuff right now in the trade market?
I think their value is low enough to take shots on since we don't have answers just yet. We know Romeo Doubs has led the team in routes run in all 3 games and did have a team high 21.8% target share in week 1 from Love. But he was still Doubs. Beyond that, Jaden Reed was the one who got there with over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns from the slot against the Eagles. And although he scored a touchdown in week 2, since that time, the passing production is clearly, although above our expectations from Malik Willis, it's still been very limited. Not only that, but Josh Jacobs' production, you could say, came against the Eagles and Colts, and then his first test against the Titans, he really failed it with 48 yards and 15 touches. So again, we just don't have answers yet. And so I think it's early enough to still buy on a Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks. I understand they're cannibalizing one another for the team's 3rd wide receiver role right now, but perhaps one of them does break out since all 4 were being drafted anyhow in fantasy before week 1.
Yeah, I like buying on those guys for sure if anyone is selling. And like even Dobbs, he's going to be out there a ton, and I think he's worth looking at. Also, people might be sick of him. The Josh Jacobs thing is interesting. I don't think people are going to give up Josh Jacobs cheaply, but I like where we have him here in the rankings. I mean, he is going to be very, very good. We have him right there with Kyron, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, James Cook. Like that's the kind of tier when they were going, I don't know, in the 40s or 50s. During the redraft process where I was like, I don't know, but they played so well. And now those guys, I think, are pretty strong targets there if you can get them in that 3rd round range. All right. Let's go to this Chiefs stuff here, Jack. I mean, Patrick Mahomes has turned into a full-blown game manager. I'm not sure that people in your league know this. Or maybe you don't think it's sticky. I don't know. I kind of think it's sticky, but we can debate whether that'll be sticky or not. He is so low in average depth of target. He is so low in passes attempted of 20 plus yards. It's like a total I don't know. It's like a 180 from the way he played when he came into the NFL. And it's obviously not ideal for really high-end ceiling outcomes. We do have Mahomes down to the quarterback 6 right now. You can make case, I think, that he could be even lower. It's been bad for Xavier Worthy, who has played more than RoS Rice, but hasn't been able to earn targets whatsoever. So I think you can go a lot of different ways. My gut is that people in your league probably think the Chiefs are still playing some wild shootout, throw the ball deep down the field offense, and maybe they're worth more to them than they are to you if you think that they're going to play this dink and dunk. So I don't know, Jack, what do you think about Worthy and Chiefs stuff right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because Worthy, even if you ignore that the Chiefs aren't throwing the ball deep, I think the most concerning thing about Worthy for me is that he has a 12% target share, and a significant number of his targets have been schemed on screens and stuff. It's just, he hasn't really shown an ability to earn targets down the field. Even that long week 1 touchdown he had against the Ravens was just a complete blown coverage where he was wide open. I mean, I wouldn't really want to sell Worthy. He was such a good prospect. Obviously, the speed is so tantalizing in the Chiefs offense. And it's only 3 weeks, and there's significant evidence out there that rookie wide receivers get a lot better throughout their rookie season. So I wouldn't really be looking to sell Worthy, especially after he had back-to-back 2 catches for 17-yard games. Like, I don't really think a ton of people are trying to buy that archetype. I think he's mostly just a hold right now. You just kind of hold him and hope that he improves. We saw Juju Smith-Schuster play significantly more in week 3. I think there's a little bit of risk that, especially after Worthy stopped on that route near the end of the game and almost cost the Chiefs the game, that maybe Juju starts eating the Worthy's snap and route share a little bit more. But we'll see. I mostly think Worthy's just someone you have to hold on to and hope he improves and hope it gets better.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I have Worthy in a league with my friends from high school, like the league that means most to me, and nobody wants him. You know, not that I really want to trade him, but nobody wants him anyways. I
knew it was going to ruin us that his 2 touchdowns in week 1 came against broken coverage and an untouched run. I knew it was going to make the worst of him.
I know. The Kelsey stuff is interesting too. Like, looks like he's completely toast. Cannot sell him for anything either. I would never want to trade my close personal friend who I love, RoS Rice. The one guy who I think maybe could get some traction in the trade market is Mahomes. If you have him, I think people still think that he is playing some wild, going to have huge games. I think he will have some really good games when he gets a lot of yak and he gets a lot of touchdown efficiency. And like, we have him as QB6. I think that's probably roughly right. But his value, like, people might still think he's, the best quarterback in fantasy or something like that. We should actually, I'm curious what you guys think. Who would you rather have rest of season at quarterback when it comes down to things like Mahomes, Jaden Daniels, Mahomes versus A-Rich? Like, we have those all super close here. We have Kyler as the QB4, A-Rich QB5, Mahomes QB6, Jaden QB7. So, yeah. It's interesting. I might. No. Go ahead, Daigle.
I still don't know if Cliff Kingsbury finally allowing Jaden Daniels to go deep was all because to respond to Cam Taylor-Britt. Like, I genuinely don't know if that's why he finally took shots downfield. Because if they did allow Daniels to go deep, Daniels clearly, he even showed at LSU, as an awesome deep passer. So I would hope that continues.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Let's keep it moving here. Panthers stuff, Mark. I mean, if you had Diontae Johnson and you got this run out where Bryce Young gets miraculously benched after just 2 games into the Dave Canales era, if you got this run out, how could you trade him? But everybody's going to say, oh, he's a sell high. He had the most opportunity in the entire league. Yeah, it's great, but he still has Andy Dalton and the team sucks. You waited this time with Diontae Johnson. You're really going to sell him now. Any thoughts on Panthers stuff, Mark?
I think at this point you're just accepting that Diontae Johnson is now in the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range every week. Obviously, the week 3 performance was potentially his best of the season, but in terms of expected fantasy points and Mike Leone's model that he does for us, he led week 3 in that expected fantasy points model. So I don't think it's necessarily all that fluky. Now you also have Adam Thielen placed on IR, which removes a lot of potential target competition for Diontae Johnson. So, we moved Diontae up about 25, 26 spots in the ranks this week. I think you could argue he could potentially be higher, like we currently have him behind someone like Michael Pittman. And I don't know if anyone would trade Michael Pittman for Diontae Johnson at this point. So I think, we shouldn't expect Andy Dalton to throw for 300 plus and 3 touchdowns every game, but they do get this Bengals Bengals defense that was just torched by Jaden Daniels and the Commanders. The Panthers still don't have a strong defense. So if Andy Dalton remains in there's some conversation that, Bryce Young, it's just a current benching and he'll play towards the end of the season. I'm not necessarily sure I buy that completely, especially if Dalton continues to cook, but we'll see there. But at this point, yeah, I think Diontae, after that big week and Thielen going on IR is mostly a hold. You could potentially sell high if people are giving you, an RB1 like James Cook or something, but I highly doubt that's happening. So, we also did sneak in Xavier Legette into the back of the top 150. I think he's an interesting stash with Thielen on IR, and he seemed to hop right into that role as well. So in general, this Panthers offense, and going back to kind of the Packers note you made when people were like, they know Jordan Love is coming back and the value is going to return. I mean, we kind of said the same thing last week with the Panthers, but the return was, a lot higher than we even thought and we could even grasp mentally. So I think with the Panthers, it's maybe we were just underselling what Andy Dalton could do for this offense. And I think Diontae is a strong hold.
Yeah. I mean, I agree, but Andy Dalton's not going to have too many more games like that. I mean, that was absolutely ridiculous what Andy Dalton came in there and did. I brought up a trade here on the trade calculator. Let's say you had Diontae Johnson. You could get Tank Dell and Kimani Vidal. I'm sure you could get that trade done. No one wants Tank Dell right now. We'll get more on him in a second. But just as an idea, if you wanted to sell Diontae Johnson, this is one that our trade calculator prefers the Dell Vidal side. And I think you could actually probably get more than that right now in the actual market. All right. A couple more topics here before we get to your listener questions. Bucs running back spot, Daigle. We talked about Bucky a bunch on the waiver wire show. Hopefully you guys all caught that. What do you think about Bucs running back? Who would you rather have rest of season, Rashad or Bucky? I can't believe that's a real question right now, but go ahead, Daigle.
I truly think it's turning into a 50-50 backfield share with Bucky now winning over early down runs. And although Rachaad White has struggled in that role the last 2 years under Todd Bowles, Bucky's already shown with 6.2 yards per carry, he can at least add some explosiveness on the ground. The issue is he going to ever be a full-time back? And not only at his pint size, but because Rachaad White is an elite pass catcher, despite what everyone wants to admit, I never think like he's ever going to actually get that 70-30, 80-20 role. But in a timeshare in today's NFL right now, that's still flexible. So yes, I'm still on Bucky. Even this past game, when they were within 14 points of the Broncos, Bucky out-touched Rashad 5-4 because they just need him out there adding something else to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I still think I'd rather have Rachaad White rest of season just because I value pass catching out of my running back so much, but it's closer now. I mean, we had this gap 45 spots wide last week. Now we have it 7 spots wide between Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. All right, last one here, Jack, on the Christian McCaffrey stuff. So really hard to value, right? Like we are not oracles when it comes to when guys are back from injury. I don't even think that anyone knows. I don't think the 49ers know when Christian McCaffrey is going to come back. I don't consider this Germany thing a bad thing whatsoever. Like people are like, oh, that's it. It's over. He went to Germany. Like he's going to come back and he's going to get some type of experimental treatment or some PRP treatment that is probably better than what he can get here in the United States and stronger. So I would consider it a good thing. We have gone to Mason ahead of CMC though. Mason 41 overall, McCaffrey 55 overall at this point. I still think there's clear archetypes of teams that can trade for Christian McCaffrey. You're 3-0. You have an IR spot. I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of teams. You have deep bench. There's a lot of different kinds of teams that can trade for Christian McCaffrey, and I would be actively trying to do so because that team is most likely 0-3 if they didn't have Jordan Mason. But anyways, it's a really tough spot Jack, what do you think about Mason and McCaffrey right now in some of these draft and best ball type stuff?
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you there. I also don't really know what to expect in terms of the injury timeline for McCaffrey. It notes in the top 150 he could be back in week 6. I think we should not expect him to be back in week 6. Some of the stuff I've seen on Twitter suggests maybe a mid-November return for McCaffrey. So it seems like he's going to be out a decent bit longer. But once he is back, I mean, you're talking about a guy who's, if he returns to the same workload he had before, far and away the best asset in fantasy football and could easily be a league winner, even if he only plays the final 4 weeks. But if you have Mason, I think he's a top 12 running back. You got him either off waivers or with a very late round pick. That's the type of pick or the type of waiver ad that catapults you to being like the best team in your fantasy league. So I think you're kind of just riding it out as long as they last. There's some non-zero possibility that this McCaffrey thing lingers all season and they can't really figure it out, and maybe you just lucked into an RB1 the whole season. I don't think I'd be looking to trade Mason.
I think that the concern for both is that CMC comes back, but he's limited, right? And so then you have this spot where CMC is not as good as he could be, and Jordan Mason, it has value, but not probably enough to start. And that would be kind of like a nightmare situation, I think, for both. But that's certainly on the table as well. All right. Let's get to some of your questions. Appreciate all the people who submitted questions on Twitter. First one comes from Angry Moose. He says, is it time to panic on Tank Dell? Popular buy low last week, but hasn't been great and now banged up. Yes, Tank Dell, I don't think he's practicing today. He has some rib and wrist issue. Doesn't sound overly serious. I thought that Tank Dell was a pretty good buy low after week 2. I believe someone else on this show said he was a good buy low in their move to make after week 3. Nothing has changed. Daigle did. Nothing has changed. He has run the same amount of routes roughly as Nico and Diggs all year. He has been underthrown on a couple balls that have been sure touchdowns if they're thrown just a little bit better. The entire Texans pass game got wiped out by Brian Flores last week, and Tank Dell still performed well. So I am certainly not panicking on Tank Dell. We're still up at 49 overall. We did have like a bunch of questions on this, Mark, though. I think we had a trade question related to it as well. And yeah, I mean, somebody said Tank Dell's been dropped. I know Daigle and I blew up Wiggins' spot yesterday because we highlighted that somebody in Wiggins' league dropped Tank Dell, and we recommended 100% fab bid. And so Wiggins ended up not getting his guy because somebody else listened to that and actually went for the 100% on Tank Dell. But anyways.
Oh, sorry, Wiggins.
Yeah, listen. He's living a pathetic life. Don't worry about him. But anyways, Mark, a lot of people are saying, how can we keep sticking with high ranking on Tank Dell?
For sure. And in the rankings, we have him as wide receiver 26 still, but he kind of starts this tier wide receivers that almost goes like 25 to 30 deep, that you can make an argument for pretty much any of those guys to be higher or lower. So I think one of the big value adds we have is this trade calculator this year. And you could see the trade value for these wide receivers. So even though Tank Dell is, 30 spots ahead of Rome Odunze, doesn't necessarily mean we would snap accept a Rome Odunze or Tank Dell for, Tank Dell straight up kind of trade. As you mentioned, I don't think much has really changed or been different than we were expecting in this Texans offense so far. It's just mostly that Tank Dell hasn't had the production, has missed out on some touchdowns. It's certainly fair to question whether those touchdown opportunities will continue to come with Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs on the roster, and with Collins' size and Diggs' experience and kind of lower ADOT, maybe he does get more of the touchdown opportunities moving forward still. But I still think Tank Dell is a clear wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 conversation. He just hasn't had the box score production to back it up. This Texans offense is going to be one of the most prolific passing offenses in the league, and we don't have too many of those at this point in fantasy football. So I'm still willing to buy low on Tank Dell, especially if he's dropped in your league. I think a massive fab bid is warranted. Waivers have been pretty thin up to this point in the season if you missed out on Jordan Mason. So I would almost be like all in on Tank Dell for fab at this point. I really think that's an overreaction to the first 3 weeks, and I still want Tank Dell on my fantasy teams.
Yeah, I mean, some people say, oh, well, what did you expect from Tank Dell? He broke his leg and he got freaking shot, right? Like, what did you expect? I haven't seen that, like, any issues. He's earning targets. He's earning them down the field. He looks like he's really healthy. I don't think that is what's going on. But, if you believe that, then you should have Tank Dell lower. If you believe that he's actually playing worse this year and is a worse player because of what happened to him last year with the broken leg and then getting shot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
and this week with the ribs and wrist injury, he got imaging done. There's nothing structurally wrong. It's just listed as soreness at this point. And, this is the NFL. After week 3, I'm pretty sure every player would say they're experiencing some soreness at this point in time. So I'm not panicking at all over Tank Dell.
I'm more injured than Tank Dell right now.
Okay. Yes. There's nothing like the long pastime of comparing our injuries to actual top 0.1% athletes in the world injuries. That's one of my favorite things. I do it too. Okay. Daigle, you know how I do. 4242 says Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely rest of seasons. Really difficult question here. We spent a bunch of time on the Mark Andrews situation on team by team yesterday. But Daigle, who would you rather have rest of season, Andrews or Likely?
It's worse if your team is struggling, especially you're losing games at tight end position, because you really don't have time to bite it out with Mark Andrews. We've talked about on the waiver wire show, you talked about on team by team, how Likely ran 4 more routes and Andrews is blocking more this year compared to last year. Given how many games the Ravens are favored in the rest of the way, maybe they do want to try to just load up the box and run the ball. But again, they also can't do that unless it's the Cowboys across from them. They've really struggled to run the ball as a whole this year. So we just need some more shootouts. I absolutely hate this question. I absolutely hate this situation between Andrews and Likely, because Andrews is someone I really don't want to start at all. Like even this week, I'd probably start Cole Kmet over him, honestly. But he's also not someone we're trying to get away from in 12-team leagues just yet. So I think I'd still prefer Andrews rest of season, but it's that close. It's a question we struggled with in talking about ROS last night.
Yeah. I don't want to give up on Mark Andrews either, and I would agree with Daigle. I don't really want to start either one of them right now. There's certainly some tight ends that probably are available on waivers that you could at least consider. But yeah, I think Mark Andrews is just too good of a player. Another guy who people have said, oh, well, he had this tightrope whatever last year and he was in a car accident, and maybe that's what's going on with Mark Andrews right now. So yeah. All right. Sir Charles Jack says, what is going on with the Denver backfield? Can you trust anyone, or is it a straight avoid rest of season like the Bears backfield but the AFC version? So Sam Sherman is doing a deep dive. I mean, what kind of life is this? What kind of job is this? But anyways, Sam Sherman is doing a deep dive on Tyler Batty. I hope I said that right. He's doing a deep dive on Tyler Batty. What that means is you're going to get tape, analytics, 2,000 words from Sam on Tyler Batty. So it's a pathetic life, but someone has to do it. You can read that for more. We do not have Batty in the rest of season top 150. We do have McLaughlin and Javonte Williams in the way back here. Jack, what do you think about Broncos rest of season?
Yeah, well, first, I was thinking it was Beatty, and then the announcers in the Denver game last week were saying Bidet. So I'm very uncertain into how it's actually pronounced. But regardless,
hold on. You're saying that it's pronounced like the toilet that you use in France? Is that what you're saying?
Cleanser?
That's what the announcers were saying. I've always read it as Beatty.
He's named after an asshole cleanser. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. I'm saying I'm saying it's possible.
Okay. All right.
It is. The pronunciation guide for the Broncos has it as bidet. Yes, correct.
Okay. All right. We'll stick with it. What could go wrong? All right. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah. So, Bidet only played 4 snaps in the first 3 quarters. It was all Javonte and McLaughlin until then. And then Bidet dominated the fourth quarter, got 8 or 9 carries, 60-plus yards, just far more efficient than anything we've seen from the Broncos really all season. Javonte also fumbled. Jaleel got a goal line carry. It's really just a mess in terms of how to project this backfield for week 4, because we didn't see Bidet at all during the first 3 quarters when the result of the game was actually in question. But then once the game got out of hand, we saw him a ton, and he looked way, way better than Javonte or McLaughlin. I kind of think it's just an avoid, like that Bears backfield. Like I don't really know what's going to happen in week 4, but it's not a good team with Bo Nix under center. The roles seem very uncertain with all three of these guys. So I'm not overly interested in any of them, really.
I mean, the question is, if Bidet actually turns out to be good, like a good player, can he consolidate enough in a bad offense to actually be someone you want to start? I'm pretty skeptical, right? Like, even if he's good, is he really going to completely ice out Javonte and McLaughlin? Pretty skeptical. So, yeah, I would be pretty light on this backfield. Daigle, I want to throw this Chiefs one to you just because we didn't talk about it on waivers. The Kareem Hunt situation. We now know he's been signed to the 53-man roster, not the practice squad. I do think that matters. The question from Hoyt the Titan is, how much workload does Kareem Hunt take from Steele and Pirine? So we didn't really get a chance to talk about Kareem Hunt on Waiver Wire Show yesterday. Daigle, what do you think about him as an ad or anything else here?
To recap from the waiver show, Carson Steele, 67% of the team's backfield touches, as we projected, out-touched Pirine 18-9, and led the league in success rate, I believe, as well. He was very good in his role, also inside the 10-yard line over Pirine too. And the issue for Pirine is that Kareem Hunt can earn carries, whereas really they haven't been willing to give Pirine that role either. So I wrote it in the waiver column. I would drop Pirine outright for Kareem Hunt just because I think Pirine's role is so minimal and won't grow that it doesn't matter even if we get Kareem Hunt wrong, who could grow into a larger role. The issue is Clyde Edwards-Helaire eligible to come back in week 5, and he could muck this up even further, even for Steele. So if I had to pick one, I still think it's Steele until or if Pacheco comes back, but Steele, Hunt, Pirine in that order for me.
Yeah, I like that take. The only thing that I might disagree with that we have here in the rankings is I'm afraid Pacheco is just done. Like, from everything I've heard,
I put him in the drop list.
It seems like he might just be toast. And even if he comes back, at what, you're really going to start him cold off of IR in the fantasy playoffs. Like, that seems kind of unlikely to me. So, yeah. Okay. Let's go to 0FFB. Let's go to AJ Mason. AJ Mason says, would you be willing to package DK Metcalf and Jameson Williams for a player like AJ Brown? Would like to consolidate the wide receiver position and looking for an upgrade. All right. I'm going to go to the trade calculator here. If you have DraftKit Pro, again, it's $49.99 to have DraftKit Pro access. You get everything in DraftKit Pro, including this trade calculator. Mark, read that to me one more time. What was it?
It's DK Metcalf and Jameson Williams on one side and AJ Brown on the other side.
Yeah, so the AJ Brown situation is likely to sit out, I think, this week. They have a bye in week 5, and then you'll get, hopefully, a 100% healthy AJ Brown for week 6. We have the DK Metcalf, Jameson Williams side as the edge here by about 16, 17%, which is pretty sizable. I think I'd agree with that. Mark, what do you think about this trade?
I think since AJ Brown, as you mentioned, is unlikely to play week 4 and then Eagles have a bye week 5, I'd be reluctant to trade for him at this point. And that's also reflected in the rankings. Obviously, AJ Brown was around round 1 wide receiver coming into the year. And if he's fully healthy, I think we'd have him back in that range. And right now we have him more as a second rounder. So if you did want to package DK and Jameson Williams, I'd probably go up a little higher into the Rashee Rice, Malik Neighbors, range. I'm not sure if any teams are willing to part with those guys at this point, but especially just given AJ Brown's outlook for the next couple of weeks, I would choose to package those guys for a different option. Given how the Seahawks offense has looked under Ryan Grubb and what we've seen out of Jameson Williams, I would honestly almost kind of lean just holding DK Metcalf and Jameson Williams unless you could get one of those top 5 wide receivers. I mean, those two are pretty strong fantasy assets at this point, in my opinion.
Yep. Daigle, Thunder Harrison says, is this the time to sell Devon Achane, potentially to get a solid 2-for-1? I still need an RB, but thinking the Dolphins could tank from here on out. I mean, I don't think anyone knows for sure, but it seems like no one is ruling Tua Tagovailoa out. It seems like, I think Fowler had a report today. Signs point towards Tua Tagovailoa wanting to play again this season. That's very vague. Could change at any time. He's eligible to be back, I believe, week 7 or week 8 is Tua Tagovailoa. In the meantime, Skylar Thompson is hurt. They could get Snoop Huntley ready. I think if Snoop Huntley can learn the system, be ready to play, he could start as soon as week 4, which I guess is an upgrade for them. I mean, the dude did make a Pro Bowl at one point, Daigle. But anyways, selling Achane is a scary one. Go ahead on this Dolphins question.
Huntley at least carried the Ravens into the playoffs, elevated Mark Andrews to a tight end 1 overall season in 2021. average 8.5 carries per game. So add some mobility behind that offensive line that Skylar Thompson and Tim Boyle just don't stand a chance against. Mike McDaniel can't scheme around pocket statues. Huntley actually can escape at least. So I think we're getting Huntley, and it was still 76% of their backfield touches for Achane. I understand the efficiency went down, but also as long as we continue hammering Achane with the majority of the team's touches, he's someone who can turn anything into explosive plays. So I'm not really trying to sell high. I think he's more of a hold, honestly, because we just don't know, as you said, when Tua's going to come back. And that's what's keeping everyone, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle included, elevated in the ROS.
I put a trade in here into the calculator with like running backs I think people might be willing to sell. Joe Mixon is hurt right now. He's not practicing again with the ankle. Jordan Mason, CMC could be back. So maybe people are willing to sell those two guys. We have it roughly even. Give up Achane, get Mason and Joe Mixon. At this point, I hate trading Devon Achane, man. I hate it. If Tua comes back, like you're going to be hating yourself for this. So, that's certainly a tough spot for sure. Another Achane question. This is the last question we're going to do. Achane straight up for Justin Jefferson or Rashee Rice. I think Jack, no brainer, right? Like you got to take Jefferson or Rice. We have them well ahead in the 150, and I know everybody needs running back help most likely, but Jefferson and Rice are two of the best assets that you can have. Period, right?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely for Jefferson. I don't know if that's standard redraft, if that means it's like an actual standard non-PPR league.
Yeah.
Which would take a lot of Rashee's value away. But I mean, a lot of Achane's value is also receiving. So I think you're probably still taking the receiver.
Yeah. I can't believe people still playing like no PPR whatsoever. It's like, it's crazy. Just like sit around all day and pray your guy falls into the end zone. I mean, like it's old school. I dig it. Okay. We said it all. No one's listened. They have merely fast forwarded to the one move to make segment. Had Chris Olave as a buy last week, had Tank Dell as a buy last week. I forget what the other moves to make were last week, but nevertheless, we're now looking to week 4. I want to give Jack the floor first here today. Jack, your one move to make ahead of week 4.
Yeah, I'm going to go with buy Josh Downs or add Josh Downs, depending on if he's available. I assume he is in a lot of leagues. Only played 57% of snaps in his first game of the 2024 season after he missed the first 2 weeks with an injury, but he still got a 25% target share. He was a really strong target earner as a rookie. Was on pace for over 100 targets. He did play 17 games and have fewer than 100 targets, but he played a couple of games hurt there, 25% or fewer of snaps in 2 games. And after that, I think he was still pretty clearly affected by the injury. So he's proven he can earn targets at a very strong level in the NFL. He was also respectably efficient given the state of the Colts offense last year. I do think the concerns on Anthony Richardson's short accuracy are pretty warranted, but really, I mean, this is just a player who I think is really talented, who is literally available for free in a lot of leagues. So I'd be adding Josh Downs.
I want to roll that into buy low on Colts, Adam, because right now the Colts, maybe because they're trying to alleviate their defense, which is banged up but also very bad, but they're running 4 fewer plays than anyone else in the league per game. That's not Shane Steichen. Like with Richardson under center for 4 starts, they were leading the league in volume. So even natural regression from this point forward makes them a league average offense, and that's something I want to buy into.
Yeah. I mean, you could get Michael Pittman for free right now. And people are asking me, should I drop Michael Pittman? And I don't really want to buy Michael Pittman right now either. I think he's kind of a receiver that needs volume. I'm not sure he's going to get it, but Daigle's point is well taken, and everything is a market, right? I mean, Michael Pittman could be literally free at some point very, very soon, like on the wire. So yeah. All right. Daigle, I'll give you the floor for your move to make ahead of week 4.
I went from a heel in caping for Keenan Allen to turning babyface right now because we're buying Rome Odunze low. Yes, it was Keenan Allen.
You're buying him high.
Buying him high, sorry, because he demanded Keenan Allen all the target share in week 1. But we still know Odunze was out there for a route on 84% of dropbacks as their 3rd wide receiver. Plus, where he earns his targets could still be more dominant than DJ Moore. I'm just trying to get a piece of this Bears offense as a whole through November, given this 2-month layup of a schedule. And Odunze right now is my favorite target. So he Tank Dell, and Chuba Hubbard, oddly, were the 3 players who were dropped the most, who should not have been dropped at all. If Odunze's out there on waiver wires, and he's out there a lot, that's a similar to Wiggins league, spend all the fab for.
Yes. Buy high. Not everything has to be a buy low. You know what I mean? You can buy high on a guy. He could still be undervalued just because he just came off of a good game. I like that. I like that call from Daigle, and just another bet against Fat Keenan. Personal issues, heel issues, fat issues. It's just another bet against Keenan here, which I'm fine to make. And also a bet, like I said before, Bears aren't gonna be able to. I just feel like they're not gonna be able to run the ball all season. Yeah. Let's see Caleb throw it 40 times a game. Why not? All right, Mark, go ahead.
Earlier in the show, we talked about how there's just very limited clear sells in the fantasy football space right now. And I think this guy is clearly at the top of the list. And it is a repeat from Daigle's of last week, but I'm going to say to sell J.K. Dobbins. We have Justin Herbert likely out this upcoming week with a high ankle sprain. Even if he does play, they get the Chiefs defense, which I think can stifle this Chargers running game. They then have a week 5 bye in Denver in the week after that. So not many favorable matchups upcoming. Joe Alt also sprained his MCL and is likely out a few weeks. Rashawn Slater, their other, top tier offensive tackle, strained his pec this most recent game. And while J.K. Dobbins did have a down game, he did, consolidate all the touches in that backfield. And we saw Gus Edwards go away. And I've seen, people tout that that's a great thing for J.K. Dobbins. And while it is a positive, I do think now, his value is still way too high in the fantasy football space. And he's a great sell. Last week, after Daigle mentioned him as a sell, we had a comment like, would you sell J.K. Dobbins for Rashee Rice? So I think there are still a lot of people out there in leagues who aren't going to be tuned into this offensive line issue. I want to get ahead of this Justin Herbert high ankle sprain. Even if he does play, he's likely to be limited. So, and also in our expected fantasy points model, J.K. Dobbins is behind guys like Chuba Hubbard, DeAndre Swift, Jerome Ford, Devin Singletary, just ahead of Javonte Williams and Rico Dowdle. Those are names that are going 4 or 5 rounds behind J.K. Dobbins at this point. So I think he's overvalued and still one of the best sells in fantasy football.
I like it. Yeah, totally agree. And it's gotten worse since Daigle or whoever had Dobbins as a sell before. It's gotten worse. Herbert's hurt, Joe Alt's hurt, Rashawn Slater's been, you know what I mean? Like, it's just gotten worse. All right. I have 2 moves to make. My main one, my normal one, is buy on Brandon Ayuk. You see here, we have not dropped Brandon Ayuk much in the rankings at all. He is still up at 23 overall. Where do you think the general fantasy player values Brandon Ayuk after his start? In the 60s, maybe in the 70s, because they're going to say he's done nothing yet. He did nothing in this awesome chance against last week when Juwan Jennings went off against the Rams. And now he's going to get Kittle and Debo coming back. So Brandon Ayuk is completely screwed. I mean, he could be really cheap. I think maybe the biggest gap between our rank and perception out there of Brandon Ayuk, it might be Brandon Ayuk. So that would be my first one. Get out there and buy Brandon Ayuk. Smaller one for me is related to the Chargers situation. I assume Kimani Vidal is available on waivers in most leagues out there. They've seen enough of Gus Edwards. They've seen enough. Data people have seen enough. Tape bros have seen enough. Seen enough of Gus Edwards. So Kimani Vidal could just get in there right away for him. And then you also be like, well, Gus Edwards sucks. Let's get J.K. Dobbins more work. Okay, great. He could get hurt very easily. Probably one of the biggest injury risks in the entire league. And so I think it sets up pretty well for Vidal. The time that you would need him / want him would probably be very late in the year, hopefully when Joe Alt, Rashawn Slater, Justin Herbert are all healthy. So, yeah. All right. This was fun. Yet another rest of season top 150 show in the books. If you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, it is indeed free. There's plenty of content on here that does not hit the regular pod feed. If you want to hear all our takes about the games before they happen and read about them, you do need an in-season product subscription at establishtheRun.com. Be sure you're following all of us on Twitter at Adam Levitan, at Mark Dank, at Not J Daigle, and is it just at Jack Miller? Jack, just all one word. Jack Miller.
I wish it was at Jack Miller. It's at Jack Miller 02.
At Jack Miller 02. Yes, he was not the first Jack Miller to ever be on Twitter, if you guys can believe that. For Daigle. For Mark, for Jack, for producer Ryan, for producer Adam, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.